This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
So how concerned should we be about Bryce Underwood's spring game performance? We'll break it all down here next on the season finale of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
They said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. And a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace, and welcome to the season finale episode of Michigan Podcast. We're going to be joined by former Michigan quarterback David Cohn from Crane & Cohn over at On3 to get his take on things. He's been the quarterback during a Michigan spring game before, so he's got a unique vantage point and an expert perspective we could not possibly provide. But let me do my very best to give you kind of the layman's take here on the question we posed at the outright. How concerned should we be about Bryce Underwood's spring game performance? Well, let me just say as a whole, number one, it looked a lot like a lot of Michigan spring games have looked in my lifetime. Defense dominated, offenses just kind of meh. All right. So in the larger sense, I would not be concerned. But I also think, as a fan, you don't want to necessarily get drunk on your own fallacies. And what's a fallacy? Well, for one side of an argument to be right means it has to work in the other direction as well. Otherwise, you've created a fallacy. And let's say this. If any of our rival quarterbacks went out there as the starting quarterback of a rival team and performed as anemically in their spring game as Bryce Underwood did in ours, what would we say? What would our social media commentary look like? Right? We wouldn't be looking for excuses or nuances. We wouldn't be wishing it away. I mean, we'd be trolling the HE double hockey sticks out of it. So you can't dismiss it outright. That's number one, because we wouldn't do it if the shoe were on the other foot. Secondly, there's a Tommy Carr problem. If you want to say, hey, listen, Bryce had lineups that he won't play with in the fall, check. A lot of guys set out who otherwise might have played, check. Okay. That applies to Tommy Carr too. Well, Tommy Carr was mostly playing against the backups. Well, that's relative to your situation and expectation as a player. Tommy Carr was a lightly recruited quarterback who was headed to Miami of Ohio, which is essentially a transfer portal farm team in today's college football. That's where he was headed until Michigan offered him late. He's also a year behind Bryce in terms of development. More than a year, I would say, and I'll get to that in a minute. So it's relative to your station. understand that we're talking about a kid who is supposed to be, probably redshirting at Miami of Ohio, looking dramatically better than our starting quarterback in the spring game. There's no other way around that. That occurred. We all watched. Now, there might be reasons for it. Those reasons might be legit, or they just might be excuses. But we did watch that happen. Considering he's in his second year in the program now, he's the 5-star quarterback and was considered maybe the highest ranked quarterback in the last 5 years of college football. That was a disappointing performance by Bryce. There's just simply no other way to spin that. And if you think it was all pass pro related, I would highly encourage you to go watch the Devin Gardner, Jake Butt episode on the spring game, where they showed with a lot of pictures and other analysis that was not necessarily the case. And I think now that you're heading into your sophomore year, I think the time of kind of covering for Bryce is kind of over. This is the year that a lot of players take a big jump. And, he's being paid accordingly. So I also wouldn't blow it out of proportion. It was just one of 15 practices. Unfortunately, it's the only one we got to see. It was the only one in front of live fans and live bullets. So, I wouldn't, say it's emblematic of all of spring ball, but I wouldn't completely and totally dismiss it either. And I do think we've all got to reckon with, how does Tommy Carr look comfortable? Well, Stevie knew what the defense was. They were going to be a 4-man front and run cover 2 the whole time. That was true with Bryce too. Bryce knew what the defense was every time. You have to assume we had the right offensive play call every single time, because we already knew what the defense was. Even if you think there's a few times maybe they just threw stuff in as coaches just to see what would happen, the vast majority of time you have to assume we had the right offensive play call. And that's because we knew what the defense was. And Connor Stallions didn't even tell us, guys. We just knew. So how do you explain 3 for 10 for a handful of yards, 1 first down, nothing that was even remotely close to scoring position in terms of touchdowns? Well, he couldn't run. Tommy Carr ran. Well, that's going to be part of, his arsenal. Well, that's going to be part of his arsenal. I think that tells you all you probably need to know about where he is as a passer. I think that we are maybe learning that we're going to have more patience here, that Bryce Underwood has to be completely reconstructed after whatever last year was. And it's going to take more time maybe than we thought. And what you're probably looking at early in the year is an offense that looked very much like Utah's early in the year. Run dominated as Devin Dampier was figuring out how to play quarterback at a higher level when he transferred in from New Mexico. Now, by the end of the season, Utah was just clowning fools on offense, putting up 40 a game. They were one of only 4 Power 4 offenses that averaged over 40 points a game last year. But they were also very one-dimensional early in the year. And I think you might see a lot of the same thing here with Bryce Underwood early on, where you're not going to see a lot of passing that isn't play action. They're going to run the turds out of the ball. And they probably have the offensive line and the running backs to do that. But it also means you better have a good quarterback, a backup, because Bryce is going to get hit more. And I'm at least confident that Tommy Carr can play at least a little bit. And then, Brandon Nicolosi Fowler comes in with 57 or 47 college starts under his belt. He comes in June and gives you another experienced player as well. But I want to close by revisiting what I said about Bryce and the time on task. And I just want to quantify some things for you. So Bryce Underwood had 15 bowl practices heading into the ReliaQuest Bowl when he first enrolled at Michigan. He then had 15 spring practices his freshman year, so that's 30 practices. He then had roughly 25 practices in fall camp. And so now you're at 55 practices. And then there would have been 5 practices every game week, and there were 12 games. So that's another 60 practices. We're now well over 100 practices. And then there was the 12 games themselves. And then there was another 15 bowl practices. So now you're at over 130 practices he's had, and then a 13th game. And then there would have been these 15 bowl practices as well. And now you're approaching 150 practices that Bryce Underwood has had. 150 practices. I think we just need to be honest with ourselves. If we would have known going in, no one would have predicted when we lured Bryce away from LSU that's the way he was going to look in his second spring game after almost 150 practices at Michigan. And we all would have been disappointed if we would have known in advance that's how he would have looked. And Tommy Carr just looked a lot more comfortable and a lot more in charge of the offense, and he'd only had 15 practices. So I think what we're kind of learning here is that last year was really a wash for Bryce Underwood, that he really didn't learn how to play quarterback as the season wore on, which is kind of why he got worse as the season wore on. Once the film is out there on you and people know what you can do. And when we weren't playing teams, we were demonstrably more talented then. Maryland, Northwestern were his two best games down the stretch of the season. We're considerably more talented than those teams. We were considerably more talented than Michigan State as well, and we had to shut Bryce down because he couldn't execute the offense. And I think that we're learning that a lot of bad habits were engineered. I just think too much of Kyle Whittingham and his reputation as a Hall of Fame coach, that if Bryce Underwood had looked like that for 15 spring practices, that Whittingham would still be decisively, he's the starting quarterback. He would not be. I think what you're seeing is the minute the heat was on, Bryce reverted back to the instincts of what he knew. And so there's more coaching there to do because not enough coaching was done last year. And so in many respects, they now have to undo all the bad habits that he engendered. And now they've got to deconstruct them in order to reconstruct them. And I think this is going to be a longer process than maybe a lot of us realized. And I would look at the character arc of Devin Dampier last year. He was very one-dimensional the first half of the year for Utah. You go back to that Texas Tech game with all those guys on defense for Tech that ended up getting drafted last week. And I mean, they just got destroyed by Texas Tech, and it's why they weren't in the Big 12 championship game. And then as the year went on and he learned more and more about what it means to play quarterback at this level, you just saw again that Utah offense was unstoppable down the stretch. And I think you might be looking at a similar form here. Where maybe you lose that Oklahoma game early against a Brent Venables defense, and then maybe an upset a defending national champion Indiana later in the second half of the year when your quarterback now has taken more of a step forward and understands how to play the position. I'm just saying that Tommy Carr doesn't have nearly the talent Bryce Underwood doesn't have nearly the time on task Bryce Underwood has already had. And yet his fundamentals, his presence, his pocket awareness were all demonstrably better in the exact same game situation. And I think that that's indicative of some bad habits were done and instilled, and this is going to take a little bit longer to put Humpty Dumpty back together again than we thought. Well, let's find out from a guy who's played quarterback at this level what he thinks. David Cohn's going to join us next. All right, now let's get an actual expert opinion, someone that has played quarterback at the highest levels and at the University of Michigan and has been in the Tommy Carr spring scenario as a backup quarterback. So he's got tons more perspective on this than we do. That's our good friend David Cohn from Crane and Cohn over at the On3 Network. Check out their phenomenal show. And before we get into football, David, you and I have not had a chance to talk on here since we won the national championship in college basketball, and just your kind of recollection of what was a special season, clearly the greatest Michigan basketball team of all time. I think it's the best team the Big Ten has had since Indiana 1976. And according to all the metrics out there, it's one of the teams of the century thus far.
Go Blue, my friend. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, like I've been telling neighbors around here, I can eat off this championship for quite a while. And since I met Jake and Blaine Crane and started doing this professionally, I've seen Michigan win a national championship in football. I've seen Michigan now win a national championship in baseball, or in basketball, excuse me. And I've seen the Atlanta Braves win the World Series. So things have been pretty good sports-wise for a while. And I really think maybe this could light a fire under the Michigan football team coming up this season. Steve, what do you think?
I think it's very possible for sure. I think that stuff is very contagious. I think given Kyle Whittingham's reputation, I don't think much more of a fire is going to have to be lit. I think you could just kind of see broadly again, and it's when you're seeing the level of body type change at a school, the magnitude of Michigan, that just indicates a different level. I mean, guys like Eno Etta look like, comic book characters now. And so I think already you're seeing that a fire has been lit. But here's the dilemma we have, David. With the schedule we're playing this year, that we could look a lot better as a team.
Yes.
But if we don't have the quarterback that's the one making the plays in the fourth quarter, we're going 7-5, 8-4 against that schedule. Mm-hmm. Even though we look like a team that would roll last year's team, but we're playing a tougher schedule, right? And I don't know. I watched closely Devin Gardner and Jake Butt's breakdown of the spring game, and they took all 10 passing attempts that Bryce had. Devin did. And pointed out over and over again how his footwork was bad, how the protection was actually not that bad, that a lot of what they were running was actually quick game. And so your coach is an offensive lineman to let the guy go so you don't get a downfield penalty, a roughing penalty, something that throws, it should be an easy gain off. In other words, they constructed a game plan for Bryce to just have to make quick decisions to get rid of the ball, and he could not execute that even in this environment. And when you're playing Oklahoma and Oregon and Indiana and Ohio State, it's the plays where you guess right. You have to win on those plays. Like we knew what the defense was the whole spring game. They were going to have to run the same covers. Those were the rules. So you have to assume we had the right play called like every time, right? And so when you're going up against Brent Venables and Matt Patricia, can't believe I said that. All right. And Indiana and their outstanding DC that just won the Broyles Award, right? Okay. When you guess right, you have to win that down because a lot of downs you're not going to guess right. And you have to kind of make it up from there. And so when I see in a controlled environment that he knew what the defense was going in and could not execute, particularly with the Tommy Carr control group, where he's playing the exact same rules. Mm-hmm. And I did some math for our audience, Dave, before we brought you on. Bryce is nearly 150 practices into his college football career. 13 games and almost 150 practices. And yet Tommy Carr, who was on his way to Miami of Ohio, looked a lot more comfortable, was willing to take what the defense gave him. That tells me that Bryce was not coached much last year. And so some bad habits were able to kind of get engendered. And then when he got into the game situation in the spring game, he probably did not do a lot of these during the spring when the coaches were right there. And then once he got into the spring game and live bullets, so to speak, some of those bad habits came back. And that tells me this is going to be maybe a longer walk back than we thought, that essentially he needs to be deconstructed and reconstructed again, where Tommy Carr is essentially just a piece of clay that hasn't been corrupted yet. You see what I'm trying to say? Sure. At least that's my analysis as a layman. I'd love to know what you think as a guy who's been there, and the floor is yours.
Oh, man, so much to break down there. Let's just start by saying any Michigan fan who watched that spring game was disappointed in Bryce Underwood's performance, or they're being dishonest with you. And we have to start there. We have to start from a place of honesty, because I think a lot of times there's some cognitive dissonance that people just don't want to allow themselves to say the truth because they fear that somehow that'll mean Michigan's going to have a bad season coming up. No, that's not necessarily the case. If you watch that spring game and you're a Michigan fan, you were disappointed in that performance. Now, if you're someone who's living in Columbus, you were thrilled by it. And it's not, Steve, it's not just the 3 for 9 statistic. I mean, who cares about that? It's because a lot of the things you were saying there, the same repeated mistakes that we were seeing last year. Now, let me push back on one point here that you're making. We're saying that he got into a lot of bad habits because of the coaching staff last year. A lot of the mistakes that I saw him making in the spring game this year looked like the spring game a year ago when he was able to get to campus early. Well, that really is before you're even getting coached up a lot of times from last year's staff. And so a lot of these things I think he came in from high school with, namely always throwing the fastball. That's the number one thing I saw in last year's spring game. It's the number one thing I saw this year a lot of times, and when he really had to have throws during the season last year. So what does that mean? Always throwing the fastball. Well, a lot of times for a younger quarterback, when you're trying to make a split decision and the guys are always covered at this level, they're almost always covered, or there's a defender close, you can get out of trouble by throwing it as hard as you can to your receiver. And no one throws a better fastball than Bryce Underwood. The arm strength is clearly there. He could have played at this level from an arm strength perspective as a 16-year-old, right? But that doesn't necessarily make you a great passer. There's a difference between throwing a football and passing a football. And so that's the thing that I wanted to see in terms of the growth leading up into this spring practice here. Now, another thing, and this is just from my experience, and you mentioned Tommy Carr, and we can get into him for a little bit, but I had the benefit of playing for his grandfather. Lloyd Carr recruited me at Michigan, and the way that we did things at spring practice then, and I talked with a lot of coaches around the country, the way that most of them still do, is these periods are oftentimes scripted, and not just for the offense, but also for the defense. Now, one thing I really liked that the Michigan coaching staff ran Bryce Underwood out there for both units for that entire first quarter, basically sending the message that, one, you are going to have to be our star. You're going to have to be the star. We're going to go as you go, but you are also not so established like an Arch Manning at Texas or some of these other quarterbacks. You're not so established that you can just sit out spring practice, right? So I like them sending that message. But when I say that a lot of these passing attempts are scripted for the offense and the defense, you know what coverages you're going to get against the plays that you've already scripted. And look, again, I said 3 for 9, so you get 9 passing opportunities there for a quarter of football. You're generally going to run the schemes that were most successful for you throughout spring practice, and you know which wide receivers or which targets are going to be open based off the coverage they're going to give you. So when I'm seeing Bryce Underwood get quote-unquote sacked twice in that period and missing a couple throws, and we have inaccurate throws, that's what sort of concerns me and that I was a little bit surprised by. And I'll just wrap it up by saying that does not necessarily need to be foreshadowing for the fall, because I think most of the growth comes from summer workouts and then fall camp. Fall camp are the most intense practices that you've ever seen, Steve. You're talking about 100 men on a football team living together in a hotel for the entire month of August. That's where Bryce Underwood is going to have a lot of time to grow still. So I'm not panicking on this. I think the number one question, and you may be getting to this in a little bit, but the number one question is, how good does Bryce Underwood need to be for Michigan to accomplish their goals? And I don't know what their team goals, the team and the captains will decide that. To me, they should always be winning a national championship and winning a Big Ten championship. Is Bryce Underwood going to be the best player at his position next fall? I don't believe so. Does he need to be that for Michigan to win a Big Ten championship or a national championship? That's the question that we need answered.
Before we get to that question, and one thing, if I was looking for an optimistic take on what you just said about Bryce, in some respects, it might be in the end good that, because I mean, I don't have to ever have worn a helmet. I just follow football. You have worn a helmet. I think we both would agree from day one, Coy Detmer, the new OC, Kyle Whittingham, they've been trying to coach those bad habits out of him from day one. I'm sure that was a focus all winter. I'm sure that was a focus in the first 14 spring practices, right? Okay. And then to have him go out there and revert back to some of those habits, it might end up being for the best, because that's humbling to a guy like him. And he, of course, is going to be very aware of what people are saying, both here and all over the country about that performance. And, giving him a bit of a chip on the shoulder from the guy who told BTN's bus tour last summer, you ain't never seen a freshman like me. And like, well, actually, at the end of the year, you kind of look like pretty much every other freshman you've ever seen.
Well, there were some that were better.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe a little humble pie of, see, this is what we tried to beat India for 14 practices. Are you going to finally listen to us? You went out there, reverted to form, and look what happened, right? So that could end up working out to our benefit in the long run, perhaps. Put yourself in Tommy Carr's shoes, right? Because one of the things I wonder about is, and this is something our mutual friend Isaiah Holfirst said to me, so hat tip to him for this analysis. His counter to me on my concern about Bryce is that effectively last year, the way that Bryce was coached allowed these bad habits to essentially set into his repertoire. And so he has to be kind of deconstructed before he can be reconstructed by the new staff. Whereas Tommy Carr is a completely moldable ball of clay that has not had those kind of habits or anything been labeled as acceptable yet. And so you're not starting over with him, but like you are with Bryce, but you're starting from scratch. And that may have been why he seemed more at ease, had more pocket presence, more awareness, things of that nature, more willing to just take what the defense gave him. You buy into any of that at all? I mean, you've been the Tommy Carr at past spring practices. No, you don't. Okay, go ahead.
Not really. I mean, again, I'm not dismissing it completely, especially now. Again, we have to draw a distinction between technical things that he's doing with the throwing motion versus bad habits that he picked up in reading certain coverages and dissecting defenses. From that standpoint, possibly. But again, that's where I get to, a lot of these things in the spring game were scripted and he knows what he's going to get. And at some point, like even the coaches last year, even if Sharon Moore is messaging Instagram models at halftime, they still were doing coverage breakdowns. He knows what he's getting. They won 9 games a year ago. So that's where I don't buy a ton of that. I think that Bryce Underwood had more talent than anyone else he ever came across for 17 and 18 years of his life, and that got him by. And now you're at a level where that's no longer the case. Now, talking about mutual friends, I've also interviewed Connor Stallions to talk about Bryce Underwood because he got to coach him at the high school level. And I would be more concerned right now if Bryce Underwood were just some phenomenal athlete that got stuck at the quarterback position at a young age and was just better than everyone because of his athletic ability for a long time. And now he needs to be a passer and he needs to be a quarterback and just can't do it. I would be concerned if that were the case. The way I understand the young man and the way that he works in the building and in the film room is that he is absolutely determined to be the hardest working quarterback, okay, in the country, and to be the person who's last in the film room every single day. And that means a lot. Now, again, I'm not there, Steve. I'm not a teammate of his the way I was a teammate of Chad Henne and the way I was a teammate of Denard Robinson, and I can vouch for these guys. But I'm just telling you from people who I do know and who are inside the building that he's willing to do the things that it takes to be a great quarterback and to be a great passer and not just be an athlete back there playing the position. And if that is true, then I still do think we could be gearing up for a breakout season in 2026.
So I compared what I think we are looking at with Bryce to exactly what happened when Jason Beck brought Devin Dampier with him from New Mexico to be the OC and quarterback combo at Utah. And if you go back and watch the first half of the year, I mean, they ended up being one of the teams that ran the ball the most in college football. But I mean, they were like triple option levels of one-dimensional in the first half of the year. And it's one of the reasons why they got completely blown out by Texas Tech. We just had the draft. Texas Tech was loaded with NFL guys on defense, and you just were not going to be able to just line up and run it downhill like that against them one-dimensionally. As the year went on and Dampier developed more as a passer, Utah ended up being one of only 4 Power 4 schools in America last year that averaged over 40 points a game. I think all the last 5 or 6 games of the year were all 40 points or more, and a couple were 50 point games or more, because now Dampier developed as a passer, and I'm beginning to think we might see a similar arc here with Bryce. I think they're going to run like 2021 Michigan levels of run the bleep out of the ball, particularly with the size of tailbacks they have with Jordan Marshall. And then Savion Hyder has like a Tyrone Wheatley recruiting profile, except he looks like Tyrone Wheatley his sophomore year, not how skinny he was when he came in. All right. I mean, and then you throw in a 230 or 225, 30-pound quarterback. And I think a lot of the passing we're going to see is play action, one read stuff to start with, especially when the season really starts game 2 against maybe the best defensive coordinator in college football, who's the head coach at Oklahoma, that I think fans should prepare for. This is going to look a lot like what it looked like when you played. All right. We're going to challenge you at the line of scrimmage to set up play action passing down the field. I don't think it's going to look like the first game against New Mexico and Bryce just go out there and wing out all over the field. I think this is going to be a longer road back to reconstruct him than maybe many of us thought. What do you think?
Okay. So Devin at Utah is a good comp there. So is Lenoris Sellers at South Carolina. Had no offensive line a year ago, still off the charts talent and athletic ability. I think Auburn's going to be dealing with some similar things with Byron Brown coming up a level from South Florida there with Golish. So I think all of these are good comps in very different ways. And that's why I get back to the point of how good does Bryce Underwood need to be, and in what areas does he need to be that level of good for Michigan to accomplish whatever their team goals are. Again, I don't know what those are because I'm not a captain and I'm not inside those rooms. But Steve, we want to win a national championship and we want to win the Big Ten. So let's just sort of operate under those auspices there. How good does Bryce Underwood need to be to do those things? Well, I think a central question to ask off that question is how dominant can the offensive line be? Because you just talked about some running backs. I think we're going to have one of the best running back rooms in the country. Quite frankly, I think we're going to have one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country, which is not something that Michigan can say year in and year out. And they're going to be big, too. I mean, big as wide receiver duos as I've seen since maybe Nico Collins and Donovan Peoples-Jones ran out there together. And so that's very exciting. And then obviously the entire entire defensive side of the football, which, I mean, everybody is so excited to watch Kyle Whittingham come in and bring that sort of smash mouth mentality that he had on both sides of the football at Utah into Ann Arbor. So all of those things help out a quarterback. Now, this gets back to something that you brought up before I came on, which is making the biggest plays in the biggest moments against the best teams. And this gets me back to 2023 when Michigan did accomplish those goals, won a national championship and won a Big Ten championship. The run game and the defense helped J.J. McCarthy so much. They helped him look like a superstar. He can turn around and hand the football off to Blake Corum time and time and time again, even so much so that we didn't have to attempt a pass in the second half against Penn State. But just doing that alone would not have won a Big Ten championship or a national championship. In those moments where you needed J.J. McCarthy to be a superstar, he made superstar plays. He ends up going number 10 overall as leaving after his third year as a junior. That's what helped put Michigan over the edge. Not that J.J. McCarthy had to be Cam Newton. Auburn in 2010 and 2011, they had to win a national championship in a very different way. There's a reason Cam Newton earned the moniker Superman. Those Florida teams, while Florida's rosters were very, very good, Tim Tebow helped win championships in a very different way. Does Bryce Underwood need to do that for Michigan to win a national championship or to win a Big Ten championship? Or even, Steve, to let's just say, let's lower the bar just a little bit, to make the college football playoff this year to get some good momentum going for next season to sort of be the big year in Kyle Whittingham's second year. I don't know. I don't know if this roster is there. The schedule obviously has gotten significantly more difficult from a year ago, like you said, but I still think that this is a very good football team with a really good staff around them.
So I think there are 7 games on the schedule that even if Bryce just took a traditional trajectory of improvement from where he was last year, he'd be the better quarterback on the field.
Okay.
And we would be the better team on both sides of the line of scrimmage for sure. And then there are the other 5 games. All right. And that's where you have a Rocco Becht, who's played a ton of football at Iowa State, has a lot of experience. And essentially, the 2026 Iowa State football team is the 2026 Penn State football team. They're taking an upper division Big 12 team, and that's the roster at Penn State.
Sure.
So Michigan will probably be better on both sides of the line of scrimmage, but not so much so that if Rocco Becht is definitively the better quarterback that day, that Penn State cannot win. You have Dante Moore at Oregon. He might be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. You have Julian Sayin at Ohio State. He might be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. You have Josh Hoover at TCU, who frankly has some of the same bad habits that Bryce does from a turnover perspective that he's got to iron out, like heading into a 4th year of college football. But he's also coached by who we all think right now is the best quarterback coach in the sport, in Kurt Cignetti. All right. And so those are, and then you have Oklahoma with the quarterback who drove us nuts last year and essentially beat it, Jason or John Mateer with his feet.
John Mateer.
And so that's where those 5 games, to get to 3-2 in those games. I'm not so sure at 2-3 if those 2 wins are Indiana and say Oregon, we couldn't still get in the playoff at 9-3. All right. But to be sure, you got to go probably 3-2 in those games. And that means at least in 2 of those games. Maybe in another one, your defense is great and you get +3 turnovers and win. But at least in 2 of those games to win them, Dave, we're going to need Bryce Underwood to be the better quarterback on the field that day. He's going to have to be better than Rocco Becht. He's going to have to be better than Josh Hoover, better than Julian Sayin or John Mateer or Dante Moore. At least 2 of those 5 dates to make the playoffs. That probably has to happen, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, and again, needs to be the better quarterback in those clutch moments near the end. Again, Dylan Raiola did some great things against Michigan a year ago, right? Just like I forecasted before that game. I mean, the kid can absolutely spin the ball, but at the end of the day, that was a situation where Bryce Underwood made big plays and didn't make the mistakes. And I do want to say, before the end of the year, before the Texas game, and before we got to really the end of the season, Bryce did a good job of not making those big turnovers that could have lost some of those marginal games, which, I mean, for an 18-year-old kid who quite frankly shouldn't have even been starting, right? Like Michigan's depth chart and roster management should have been in a position where you're not having to start an 18-year-old kid. But let's just say, hey, Bryce wouldn't have flipped unless he could start right away as a true freshman. He knew what he was getting into and he took the necessary lumps. Still, he took care of the ball in a lot of places there. again, getting back to throwing that fastball, right? Getting away with some of the arm talent and the arm strength for even when it was an incomplete pass or it looked like an ugly throwaway, not throwing the football in such a way where it would have been intercepted, which quite frankly, I've had to live that life as well. Not having the strongest arm in the world, and sometimes those things get picked off. But in those 5 games that you're talking about, I think it's worth pointing out 3 of those are at home. Right, so you get Oklahoma in the home and home. This is the second half of that. There, we get them in Michigan Stadium. Indiana comes to Michigan Stadium. Penn State comes to Michigan Stadium. At Oregon and at the Buckeyes to end the year. I mean, those are 2 tough road games there, and those teams are going to have great rosters. But again, that's a question of how much can Kyle Whittingham in year 1, not in 2, 3, 4 years down the road. How much in year 1 can he actually punch above his weight and beat some of these teams?
All right, let's close it out with this. We'll have our poll results here next segment, but I'm going to ask you what the poll question this week was. What one word do you think best describes your thoughts of where Bryce Underwood is as Michigan's quarterback coming out of spring? Would it be concerned? Would it be developing? Or would it be superstar? Which word do you think we're at?
Let's go with developing. I actually like that word, developing. And quite frankly, I think that should be the answer for any quarterback that you could put up there. I mean, put up Tom Brady after he's won 6 Super Bowls, but before he's playing in the 7th, he would tell you he's still developing. And quite frankly, this is a mentality that I got from longtime Michigan equipment manager John Falk, who, anytime he would be asked, what's your favorite championship ring that you have, John?
The next one.
My next one.
Yeah.
My next one is my favorite. So if there's a quarterback in Ann Arbor in Schembechler Hall who says he's not developing, then we have a problem.
That's a great perspective. Why we brought you on here again, brother. Good to see you. God bless. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Check him out. Crane and Cone over at On3, and we'll be back and wrap things up here in a moment. This week's X-Bowl results, we'll ask you guys the same question we just asked David Cone, and you guys had the same answer by and large. What one word best describes what you currently think of Bryce Underwood as Michigan's starting quarterback? 53% of you said developing. That was number one. 43% said concerned. 4% said superstar. Those numbers would have looked different coming out of the spring last year, though. That brings us to our feedback of the week, and it is in response to my take on the Lions drafting Derek Moore, who's not your necessarily crush the can guy, but way more of a pass rusher and can set the edge too, but he wants to get to the quarterback. And this comes from in response to my analysis of him. Dr. JT PhD writes, hey, Derek Moore graded second best of all defensive ends in pass rush win rate in actual rushing situations per Pro Football Focus. He does have long arms, could benefit from another pass rush move or two. I think that's a really good scouting report. I agree. But if you look at the Lions draft, they clearly now want to emphasize more of a pass rush. And this is a bit of a philosophical change. They've been more of a stop the run first. But even the 2 defensive linemen they drafted were smaller, quicker, pass rush kind of defensive linemen. Derek Moore is not a crush the can, just hold the edge. He can hold the edge, but he is a pass rusher. Different kind than Aiden. More speed to power. So you're giving defenses, dual looks there, not just the same look on both sides. So, but I was excited by the Lions drafting Derek Moore. I think that's a very good fit, and I think he'll be an excellent complement to Aiden Hutchinson. Well, this does it for yet another season. Let's see, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. This was our 9th season, if you can believe it, of Michigan Podcast. We'll be back in July for the start of season 10, the first season of the Kyle Whittingham era. We've got one more episode left here on the channel, though. That's next week's Bigger 10 season finale. And you'll see Aaron for that episode, but I want Aaron to hear me in front of all of you to thank him for all that he did this last year to produce all these shows for us. And, David Cone was talking about his time on Crane and Cone. Since he came over, he has seen Michigan now win a national championship in both football and men's basketball. And the same applies for us. Since 2017, we've got a chance to see both of those things and tell those stories here on Michigan Podcast. And just for a lifelong Michigan fan like me, that's just been why we started this, just for fun, as a true joy. And it's been a ton of fun for 9 years, heading into year 10 later this summer. So hope all of you have a great summer. And we'll see you guys again in July. Don't forget, you can like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, comment, and follow us, before we return in the off season at Michigan Podcast. Any breaking news there, we'll have instant reaction to it there on X, at Michigan Podcast on X. And again, you guys are the reasons we get to do this. You guys make it all worthwhile. Thank you guys for everything, for another outstanding year. I'm Steve Deace. See you next summer. Go Blue.